Okay, while everyone is settling back down, I'm going to start with the introduction of our keynote. So presenting the keynote today, titled Anti-Fragile, Nurturing Joy Through Our Toughest Times, is Kiew. Jay is a retinoblastoma survivor who has accomplished great success in his personal and professional life. At the age of 19, Jay was the world's youngest distinguished Toastmaster and has been featured in the Financial Times, Globe and Mail, Financial Post, Ivy Business Journal, Change Leadership, and in Crab as well. In his professional career as a change navigation strategist and world-renowned keynote speaker, he has worked for countless executives to design and develop organizational change. I met Jay in 2020 when he attended what we had at the time was monthly regional working groups and helped develop the RB Research and You booklet. That QR code in the back was Jay's idea, so that's how we got introduced to QR codes, and now we use them often. All attendees felt an impact by Jay, whether it was his bright ideas, a friendly attitude, or positive outlook, and we're happy to have him here share with us how he developed resilience and joy through tough times. Welcome, Jay.
If I have this here, can you all hear me okay? Oops, my bad. Here, one sec. Imagine it's 1895. The year's 1895, and you're living in Dayton, Ohio. I know what you're thinking. Dayton? Weird. But you're living in Dayton, Ohio, you're downtown, and as you start to look around, you notice the sun. In fact, you feel it. It's warming your face as you're wrapped in a bit of a calm breeze. You cross the street, and as you cross the street, a horse and carriage go clop, clop, clop behind you. As you turn to look, a bicycle whizzes by you going, you're like, whoa, cyclist, you gotta watch out. But you cross the street, you reach your destination, you push open the door, and the door rings with the ever gentlest jingle. The store owner, Orville, greets you. Oh, good, you're here. I have exactly what you're looking for. I'll be right back. And he runs to the back, and a few moments later, he pulls out a brand new bicycle. You look down, you smile to yourself a little, and you think to yourself, oh my goodness, I am finally the owner of a right bicycle. You thank Orville for his time. You say, hey, this is great. I've been waiting a long time for this. I know there's been a long wait list. And you're about to leave, but something stops you. As you look at Orville, you notice that he's a little bit eccentric, a little bit hazard, right? He's kind of looks a bit focused on something else. And you ask him, you say, hey, Orville, what are you working on? He opens his mouth. He's just about to respond to you, when from the back you hear, flight. We're going to give humans the power of flight. You raise your eyebrows a little bit. You're like, what is that? And Orville smiles and he beckons to you and he says, come on, come check this out. And as he leads you into the back, there you find this guy, Wilbur, his brother. Now pause. If you saw this man and this contraption and he says, hey, we just figured out a flight, get in, we're going to push you off a cliff, would you do it? Everyone's like, no. Remember, this is 1895. Back then, Wilbur and Orville Wright weren't aviation mechanics. In fact, they were bicycle specialists. Back then, we didn't actually even have cars. Back in 1895, we didn't have the first gas-powered automobile. That came around in 1897 with Carl Benz. He ended up creating what we know as now Mercedes-Benz. And the first mass-produced automobiles didn't come around until 1903 with the Oldsmobile. And so here are these two brothers in 1895 thinking to themselves, bicycle, horse and buggy, flight. Bicycle, horse and buggy, flight. And I can't try to even imagine what their vision at that time must have been, because it was a little bit aspirational, but a little bit nuts at the same time. But here's their vision. How do we give humanity the power of flight? The Wright brothers didn't figure it out in 1895. They didn't figure it out in 1896 or 1897. In fact, in 1898, things took a bit of a dark turn. Susan Wright, their mother, passed away. And Orville and Wilbur went into a pretty dark place. And that had me thinking, in the midst of that vision, where they had so many hopes and dreams for the future, they were trying to disrupt transportation as they knew it at the time. How do we find joy in our darkest times? My name is Kiew, as Ivana mentioned. I'm probably the only person you'll ever meet who can pronounce his full name in just 2 letters. JQ. Kind of like Jay-Z, but I'm not a rapper. If you're curious about the last name, I was originally born in Singapore. Any Southeast Asians in the house? No? It's okay, we have a very small population. Singapore is like 5 million people max, so I was setting myself up for failure on that one. But Ivana had mentioned that I'm a change navigation strategist. All that really means is I've faced a lot of change, which everyone in this room literally has too. I moved about 8 times before I was 12. So I was born in Singapore, I grew up in Sri Lanka, and then I ended up on the West Coast with Vancouver. I grew up on an acreage in Langley. And if I'm being honest, it feels a little surreal to be speaking here today. Because as Ivana mentioned, I speak for a living now. But I've never had to speak to like my people. You know, so I'm a retinoblastoma survivor. I was diagnosed when I was about 1 year old. My mom tells the story over and over again. I have to avoid talking about my mom because she said that she'd hop online, and if I do, I'll start crying. So we'll see how this goes. But she tells the story all the time where, you know, I'm getting babysat by my aunt, and they take a picture of me, and my cousin, who's a bit older, she's maybe 5 years old at the time, she notices that when they took a picture that one of my eyes was showing up red, like a red glare. And anyway, in Singapore, you know, I was blessed to lose only one of my eyes. I ended up half blind. This is a glass eye. And it's weird because normally when I speak in front of people, I wear glasses. And I think it's because I'm self-conscious of how I look even today, despite speaking in front of audiences all the time. And today, weird, first time ever, I was like, what if I didn't? What if I didn't wear glasses and like was okay to just hang out with my people? And so thank you for being here, and thanks for letting me show up like this. Anti-fragile. Why did I pick this title? This is not my idea. It's Nassim Taleb. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile, and it was all about how most things, when there's pressure, they break. Right? If you throw a brick against a glass or a vase, right, it'll shatter. And anti-fragile is the notion of actually the opposite of that. Right? So when we face really, really difficult things, what if instead of shattering or breaking, we actually grew? And I thought, okay, That's a really cool concept. Well, how does that apply to us, to the people in this room? And don't we know we face a lot of tough times with RV? It's like, oh my gosh, what are we going through, right? When you first get hit with it. And so that's what I'm hoping to tackle today. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So what I put together, normally it's called the change navigation playbook, but I figured for today, like, let's call it the anti-fragile playbook. And first, there's 3 steps that are really like basic strategies that you probably already do. But I think I just wanted to call it out, that maybe it's just a friendly reminder that this is what's most important when we navigate tough times. Number 1, connect to community. Connect to community. Those who partner go farther. Orville and Wilbur Wright are often claimed as the fathers of flight. And the misconception there is that that's their invention. But they actually didn't do it alone. In fact, when Susan Wright had passed away, one of the biggest things that they leaned into with community was none other than Catherine Wright, their sister. She became their main caregiver, and it wasn't just a maternal type thing where she leaned into supporting them. She was everything that they couldn't be. They were shy, they were, introverted, geniuses, very much so. But Catherine Wright was totally the opposite. She was charming, she was charismatic. So when they had approached the US government, they said, hey, we have airplanes, we're building them. The US government said, no, we don't want them. So much so to the point that the French government said, hey, we'll welcome you with open arms. We want your airplanes. And you've got these 2 like awkward genius brothers, moseying around, and they couldn't raise funds, they couldn't talk to people, they didn't know how to do that. And Catherine was the one who was so charming, the French people fell in love with her. They gave her the Legion of Honor, right? They knew that they couldn't do that themselves, so they had to lean into the power of community, their family, right, to do that a little bit better. The second person that they leaned into was none other than Charlie Taylor. You could find Orville and Wilbur Wright in North Carolina in the early days, and what they would do is you could find them on a beach. And on the beach, they were trying to figure out flight, and what they would do is they would look at birds, and they would start to like flap their wings, like their hands, to try to model how birds flew. So imagine you look at a beach and someone's just walking up and down, going like this the entire time. And they started to tell Charlie about this. They said, hey, Charlie, I don't know what's going on, but this is how birds fly. What do you think? And Charlie was the one who put together the idea that it wasn't the ability to soar that could make people fly. It was the ability to propel things forward. You see, when birds are in flight, they actually spend most of the time flapping up their wings up and down. They don't spend most of their time soaring. And before, up until that point in 1895, plenty of people had actually passed away trying to see how far they could soar, and then they would eventually crash and it wouldn't work. Charlie said, hey, let's put together an engine similar to what we're starting to play around with, like vehicles, right? We can kind of see something that'll continuously push us through the air. That'll help us get to flight. The Wright brothers leaned into the power of community to land the vision of flight. On March 6, 2023, I got an email from a specialist of mine. And it was a bit of an awkward email because I'm a cancer survivor, and I knew this day would eventually come. Maybe. I was kind of hoping it wouldn't, but it did. And the email said this: Jay, we did your MRI. This is through BC Leaf Clinic, right? So Dr. Payton, shout out, good to see you. But she connected me with the Leaf Clinic for lifelong monitoring of the cancer. And I knew that as I hit my 30s, the chances of secondary cancer would continue. And I'm like, oh no, here we go. I'm mid-30s now, what's gonna happen? I get this email and it says, Jay, we found a tumor in your pituitary gland. It was about a year ago. And I think to myself, F, not again, not now. some of you, I've been in crowd for a little bit. Some of you knew that early on in the pandemic, my wife and I were trying for a kid. And it really got me. I shouldn't have checked my phone before I came right up here, because I checked my phone and Teresa's actually online. And she sends me a picture of Maddie, who's my daughter, like looking at the laptop. And back then, when March hit and I got the email, it was a small tumor. By the way, just you're like, oh my gosh, you're dying. It's a small tumor and it's benign, so I'm okay. But it was a 0.5 millimeter tumor that felt like a 1,000,000-pound mountain in that moment. And all I wanted to do was think to myself, like, I want to see Maddie grow up. I want to see her drive. Right? I want to see her have kids of her own. That's important to me. And so I'm like, okay, how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this? And it wasn't about just navigating it. It was about how do I nurture joy in this moment that felt like really, really tough. And I realized that I needed to lean into the power of community. Right around the same time, World Health Organization, this is November last year, declared loneliness as one of the biggest problems in our society today. Despite the fact that we're mostly really connected to social media, right, to our phones, to Instagram, you name it. And I couldn't help but think, as all of these stats kept on popping up, how do I lean into community? Along the way, as I was telling, so I made the decision, and I said, if there's one thing I want to do differently, when I first navigated our retinoblastoma, when I first navigated like losing my father, right, all of these things, I tended to just do it on my own, without my family, and I was like, okay, we've got 30 years of experience now. How do we do things differently? And it was the power of community. I was like, okay. So I started talking to people and I decided to start telling my friends. And it's really awkward when you start to tell friends that you have a tumor at dim sum. It's like, hey, Pete, guess what? I've just wanted to let you know, got a tumor in my head. Can you pass this your mind? And they're like, those conversations went exactly how you might expect, right? Are you okay? Is there anything that we can do to help you? Like, we're here for you. But one conversation stuck out to me in particular that was probably the most memorable moment I've had in the last 24 months. And that moment was with Jeff. I was at Earl's in Brentwood and Burnaby. We're having brunch, and I was like, okay, this is like my 6th friend that I've told. Like, I'm just like, he matters a lot to me. I'm just going to tell him. I say, Jeff, just so you know, I've got a tumor in my head. And he didn't respond like the rest of my friends did. In fact, he just sat there for a little bit, just taking it all in. And then he slowly reaches out and he grabs my hand. And Jeff and I have never grabbed hands ever before. And I just broke down in that moment because he saw me for what I was going through. And through that, we were able to start to joke around and find joy, and all of that. Then I found later on has actually probably helped. I was talking to Dr. Alan Bates, and by the way, I'm like serious imposter syndrome here because I'm not a doctor, and there's tons of doctors in this room. And so if I don't get the scientific reporting on this right, I'm so sorry. But I was talking to Dr. Alan Bates. He's over at BC Cancer Agency, and he was talking about this research that he's currently working on. It's not published yet, but it shows that those who face a secondary cancer, they're 2 times more likely to live longer than someone who faces it alone than with community. So like if I'm doing it and if I'm socially isolated, I'm likely to die earlier than if I'm going through social support. I'm telling people, I'm working through it with others. And this has been proven over, I dug in a little bit more and I was like, this is revolutionary. Alan, like, is this the case always? And he's like, actually, it's not really that new. We've got tons of surveys that are like pretty correlated with that if you lean into others, you're more likely to like increase your chances of like living a little bit longer. And that just noted to me the power of this community. I didn't have crab growing up, right? And I forget who I was talking to on the way in. I was like, hey, what brings you here today? And they're like, well, we've got a kid who has RB. And I'm like, man, I wish my family had this, right? Like, I wish my family had this community growing up, because that would have just made it easier to, I've seen Jen in the back. When Teresa and I were family planning, right? I reached out to Jim and I was like, I don't know what we're doing. I know I've got this disease, right? I know my dad had it. What are our chances? And so she walked us through like what genetic testing looked like. How do we prevent it? Teresa's probably not comfortable sharing with us, but we went through like all of the amniocentesis stuff to identify like, and now Maddie's healthy. But like, I wouldn't have known that without Jen, you leaning in, and all the other people leaning in this room. So, power of community. This is Jeff, by the way. Yeah. Out of curiosity, I don't want to keep talking up here by myself. So what I want to do is I want to give everyone about 5 minutes. And I just want to, I want you to turn to the person next to you, maybe turn to the person behind you, especially if you came with the person next to you, right? Like branch out a little, right? Connect with others. Just turn to them and ask them, right? How has community, whether it's this one or another one, brought you joy during your tough times? All right, I'll play some music in the background, and then you'll see the timer come down and we'll come back. Sound good? All right, how has community brought you joy? Go.
For the virtual folks, you guys can chat online.
All right, real quick, I just want to hear if someone from Nova Scotia or Vancouver wants to hop online, or someone in this room, go ahead and throw up your hand, and then maybe someone moderating, just like raise your hand and like let me know. What was the highlight of your conversation? Just real quick, anyone want to share?
Maybe we could start.
I'll look that up.
Okay, perfect. Toronto, then anybody who wants to share.
Oh, I'll let her throw. Thank you.
I have to use a microphone. I just think, I feel like we really shared something that was meaningful and deep and real, which is pretty neat in a very short amount of time.
Wow, cool. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online? And if you're online and you've got, oh, Michelle. Michelle's got thoughts. Talk to us, Michelle.
Yeah, I guess, oh, the microphone, okay. Yeah, I've been around in the community since 2020, and having family members who've also had bilateral IB, it's been interesting because, like you have both, like your family community, which you have different comfort levels of talking about different things, and then there's the diverse, like, Canadian RB community as a whole, and being able to kind of share your experience has been a joy within itself. Another thing that we had found we had in common is music. And, you know, I sing in choir, and one of the interesting things that you learn when you're in an ensemble, especially a choir, is that when you sing, your like heartbeat actually syncs up with each other, which is a pretty interesting like tidbit of you know, scientific information about performance. But you're like physically joined in this activity, but also you have, similar to this community, like that common ground of enjoying performance and being able to like lose yourself in that. So, you know, I think having the balance of both, of finding somewhere to as like an escape, but also finding somewhere to like lean on, has been something that's been really beneficial. So yeah, we were talking about that.
That is so cool. I did not know that about heartbeats and singing at the same time. I don't want to sing to everybody all the time. I saw a note online about Mary saying like journeying together makes the journey, going with it together makes the journey easier. Anyone else online? Just to give, I'll give a moment or two if you want to hop off mute and share a little bit about your conversations. Vancouver, Halifax. No, that's okay too.
Hello.
What up, Halifax?
There you go. We are here. We have Jose and Kim here. And Kim, I don't know whether you would want to come up to the microphone because I don't have a microphone that I can pass around. Just maybe to talk a little bit about your experience with the community here. So Kim is just going to come up here. Just a little about the farming community
Oh,
that you
yes.
found. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kim, and I'm a retinoblastoma survivor from New Brunswick. And you might notice a little accent because I'm French. So we were sharing about how has community brought us joy. And I was sharing with my little group here in Halifax that in the past few years, like when COVID hit, I started to, I was living in a rural house and I started collecting farm animals. So we started small with chickens and then ducks and then geese. And then we were like, hey, let's go for goats. So we got some goats and then last year I was like, you know what, Jose, I'm gonna quit my job and I'm gonna become a farmer. So that's what I did.
Whoa.
Yeah. So now I raise my own poultry and we have a herd of goats and I'm in charge of all of that. And I was telling everyone in Halifax how I've been connecting with this whole farming community in my hometown and the surrounding areas that I had no idea existed, and how kind and compassionate and just so welcoming all those people have been, and the advice they have and the experience they have is so priceless to me. And I'm really excited to be part of that community. And now I'm joining the crab community and I'm excited about that too.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I feel like we need to send all of Crab to Halifax just for a farm now. That's so cool. Thank you. We'll keep going just for time's sake. Number two, that in the anti-fragile playbook is how do we work with wonder? So the first step was connecting with community. Number two is how do we work in wonder? And one of the things is when Teresa and I got married, we moved into our first apartment, and as you might imagine, it was empty. There was nothing in the apartment. But prior to us getting married, I had prided myself on being a minimalist. I owned like 10 pairs of clothing, a laptop, and like that was it. And then we moved in, and we asked ourselves the question, what matters now? And for us, what mattered now was we needed kitchen appliances, a couch, a TV, you name it. By the way, like some people like perked up when they heard kitchen appliances. I feel like there's some freaky air fryer people here in this room. But we got all that stuff, right? And then the pandemic hit, and Brooklyn came along, so we became puppy parents, and we asked ourselves the same question: what matters now? What matters now? What do you think we needed when we got a dog? Any guesses? Yeah, keep them coming. What else?
Backyard.
I wish I had a backyard. I live in Vancouver. Yeah, dog toys. What else? Food. Yeah, for sure. And then, as you all know the story, right? Teresa and I had Maddie, so Maddie came along, and she's 2 now, by the way. Oh my gosh. Anyway, but we asked ourselves the same question, like, what matters now? And what do you think we got with Maddie? What started entering the house? Stuff. A lot of baby stuff, toys, diapers. What was that? Crate? No, we don't put our kids in crates. Costco membership, clothing, yeah. And we realized, like, I get to this point where Teresa and I are like, we're surrounded by all this stuff in our living room. And I realized that we've been asking ourselves the wrong question. We've been asking ourselves what matters now when we should have been asking ourselves what matters most. And by the way, like when I described all the stuff in the living room, you're like, oh my gosh, he looks like one of those people on the TV show Hoarders. Probably has just a ton of stuff everywhere. Yes, that is the case. But it's this notion of, in order for us to get to clarity, we actually have to explore all of the clutter that's surrounding us. And similar to that, if you think about RB, what does that look like when it comes to exploring what's possible before we can zoom in into what's most important? This has nothing to do with RB. This is Brian Chesky. He's the CEO of Airbnb. And I want us to take a bit of a step back away from the medical lens to think about the business lens. I'll play this short clip. It's about 2 minutes long. It's on how Airbnb explores the clutter to get to clarity.
But we wanted to think to ourselves, what would make the
Hold up. How do we not do that? What would I mute? This?
No, I think we need that on. We could try, if we mute that and see if it plays.
Okay.
If you press the green button, it will mute it.
But we wanted to think to ourselves, what would make the experience something people love? And so we created this exercise. We thought, like, you know when you go on Airbnb, and this is also true Uber, like a 5-star mostly means like nothing bad happened. And we thought, well, what if there was like a 6-star? What would that be when you check into Airbnb? And the 6-star is you get to your Airbnb, and there's like a bottle of wine waiting on a table, and there's like some fruit, and they like have a handwritten note to you. And like, okay, that's like really nice. And then I thought, well, what would a 7-star experience be? A 7-star experience is they get a limo, they pick you up at the airport, and there's this like whole curated experience. You get to the house, and they know you like surfing, and there's a surfboard there waiting for you and all that stuff. So then I thought, what would an 8-star experience be like? An 8-star experience, you get to the airport, there's a giant elephant, and you get on the elephant, and there's a parade in your honor, and you go to your Airbnb. So what would a 9-star experience be? The 9-star experience is the Beatles check-in. You land, and there's 5,000 teenagers cheering your name. And you get to your Airbnb, and you have to do a press conference in the front lawn. So what's a 10-star experience? We'll keep going. A 10-star experience, you show up, and Elon Musk says, we're going to space. And you do get back eventually. And the point of this story is that you maybe can't make an 8, 9, or 10-star experience. But most people try to design something that's just good enough. But if you can add that 6 or 7-star, if you can design something really amazing, and you use the part of your brain, the handcrafted part of your brain to create that perfect experience, then you can reverse engineer how to industrialize this millions times over. And what happens is people love your product, and they tell everyone else about your product. And what ended up happening in our business is Hilton was started in 1919, over 100 years ago, and we were able to have the entire growth of Hilton in 10 years. And this is how you do it without, we had some marketing, but not, initially not a lot.
Are we designing for just good enough? Sorry, I'm just putting up the volume so that they can hear us online. Are we designing for just good enough? So that's a business example, but in our own lives, like, are we designing for just good enough? And when we get hit by tough times, like a tumor, like RB, like something new that we didn't expect, right? It's pretty easy for us to go into like survival mode of like, okay, let's just survive. Sorry, not survival. Survival mode where like, let's just survive, let's just make it through this and like figure it out as we go. And I wonder if we can work in wonder, not from like what is today, but in the possibility of like what actually could be. Within futurist thinking, there's this thing called the cone of possibilities. And so often, in the moment of like the tumor email that I got, right away I jumped to the small disclaimer at the bottom that said 0.5% of people with this tumor in your pituitary gland die. Like I jumped straight to that and was like, okay, that's probably going to be me. And actually, what happens in reality is that's one of practically infinite possibilities. So the cone of possibilities starts to drill down a little bit. Don't just look at what's possible, start to look at what's plausible, start to look at what's probable, and then try to dig into like what's preferable. And by taking a scan of all of that, now you can start to see a future that is outside of like what we all tend, like, let me not project, what I tend to do. I tend to just say like the worst possible scenario is going to happen to me. Like I'm going to die from this tumor. And instead, once I started to step away from that, it was like, wait a minute, like what else could I do? What if I didn't focus on that? What if I just focused on the health and the family and the future and all of that, right? What does that look like? And so there's this question of, I wonder what life would look like if, ... Forget who was talking to me at the start where they came up and they said, like, it's so wild what you've been doing over the last year. I feel like I know someone famous. And I was like, oh, weird. Like, I'm not famous at all. And it was just this notion of like, actually, it's because I've just started purely stepping into like what's possible. I am like, because I don't know how long I'm gonna have. So it's like, F it, let's just go for everything I possibly want now. All of my risk, like any kind of risks that held me back, is like, oh no, actually what's more important is that I step into the unknown because I'm not gonna know what's on the other side. So we're gonna skip this for sake of time, but I do wanna invite you, hold on one sec. I do wanna invite you to consider, just write this question down. Most of you are like, I don't have a pen, Jay. On your phone, if you could just write this question down and come back to it later. I wonder what my best life would look like. Like, what would I even want? I'm pretty soon, like, you know, you'll start to realize, or let me just take a step back. I started to realize my best life actually isn't that fancy. It's not like let's become a rock star. It's actually none of that. My best life actually looks like me spending time on the weekends. Actually, I'll show you. Let me show you. This is what happens when I started to work in Wonder. I started to evolve my vision. I started to evolve focus. So I started to do more of what I wanted. I started to evolve my idea of family. So spending more time with family. So this is Maddie. And here's a little clip. If it plays. No. Teresa doesn't know I put this video in. This has nothing to do with anything. I just think it's a funny video. Where's my mouse? Does anyone see it?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is.
Teenagers cheer at you, and
Oh, okay. Sorry. No,
I haven't heard a simple thing about Anna yet.
No, I'm leaving this.
But it's this notion of like, how do we start to evolve everything that we're thinking about so that we can shatter the ceilings in our minds? And maybe it's actually the person in your life that you need to be for somebody else to shatter their ceilings, or maybe someone else is going to shatter them for you. About 2 years ago, I was talking to this lady. Her name is Barb. She used to be a client of mine. She was the VP of HR at UBC and ICBC previously. And I thought to myself, man, this lady has like 30 years of experience on me. I just need to ask her, like, what do I do with my career? I'm pretty young still, and like, what do I do with my career? And I said, Barb, I don't know if I'm capable of, you know, I don't know what I'm capable of doing, right? I don't have confidence. I don't think I'm going to be great. I just want to know what it might look like if I jumped out onto my own in my own career. And what shattered my ceiling was a single phrase from Barb. It was this: it's inevitable. It's inevitable that like if you wanted to go global, you could. And in that moment, I like broke down because I didn't see that same belief in myself. I wasn't even thinking global, right? Like I wasn't even thinking about big aspirational things. I was just thinking to myself, like, can I pay off my mortgage if I go at it myself? And what Barb did was simply by believing in me and saying that out loud, immediately my ceiling was shattered to say like, actually you could have like everything you ever wanted, just do it. And it was this beautiful moment where I was like, what if I tried to start believing in others just like a little bit more? What would that look like? I'm gonna skip through this. And maybe I will create a bit of time for this. Is it okay if I carve out a bit of time? I guess I'm curious, if you think about who's evolved your vision, right? Who's shattered your ceilings? Who's shifted your perspective lately? Who changed your life that you never got a chance to thank? So I'll give you maybe like 3 minutes for this. Turn to someone new, but who changed your life that you never got a chance to thank? All right, so 3 minutes. Turn to someone behind you that you haven't spoken to yet, and then we'll come back. All right, go. All right, we'll start to bring it back. I know a lot of these conversations are just getting started, but this is just continuing as you head into break, right? Like, keep digging into this, right? Because I think it's pretty fantastic. Mark, really quickly, he's a buddy of mine from Ottawa, and he's a veteran. And I was hanging out with him last week, and I mentioned that I couldn't, one of the statements that I kept on saying was like, I can't wait until July comes, because then this really busy season will be over. I just kept on saying that over and over again at dinner, and Mark comes to me and says, never wish the time away, Jay. And like, Mark's the guy that I would thank, because I actually haven't thanked him for this, now that I say this out loud. So I'm gonna text him on break, and some of you can be like, hey, did you text Mark? Because never wish the time away is just such a, I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, I should be right here, right now in this moment. And so, how do we connect to community? How do we work in wonder? How do we evolve our vision? I've got one last story for you, and then I'll head us off. But in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a man, his name was Roger Cool. He was a DJ. He was one of the most famous DJs in Singapore. In fact, if you were going through Singapore and you were like the Backstreet Boys or Toni Braxton or Britney Spears, chances were you probably got interviewed by Roger. And one of the reasons Roger was so famous is that Roger, and like, spoiler alert, you saw the picture, Roger was blind. Roger was blind. He was Singapore's most famous DJ, but he was also a blind DJ. And at one point, Roger gets into the booth with none other than Stevie Wonder, who is also blind. And this is weird for both of them, right? Normally, like, they're the only blind professional hanging out and, you know, hanging out with others. And so Roger says, hey, oh my gosh, Stevie, I have to ask you this. Let me share something with you, and then I want to get your point of view on this. And he says, there are many things that are impossible for a blind person. You can't drive, and you can't become a surgeon. But for everything else is possible. What do you think about that? And Stevie thinks to himself for a little bit, and he mulls it over, and then he pulls out his harmonica, and he blows a few notes. And he says, yeah, most things are impossible, but I think it's our job to actually see a future that others can't. And it's our role to step into that. That's what we do with our music, and what you do with DJing, and that's why I keep on doing what I was doing, because when I started out, I didn't know any other blind singers. And Roger was like, I didn't know any other blind DJs. And as the minute there's one, there can actually be more of that. I didn't know that there was a crowd. And now there is. And now that continues to proliferate. Look around the room, look at how big this is. And online, right? Like, it's this notion of like, we've grown tremendously over the past bit. Because someone, right, the people in this room, started the vision that they could then start to build upon. And coming back to Wilbur and Orville, they didn't figure out flight in 1897, 98, 99. It took them until 1909. That was when, in New York, along the Hudson River, with 1 million people watching them, they had finally accomplished flight. You fast forward 60 years, and that wasn't the end of the story. You all know where this is going. Neil Armstrong lands on the moon. And in such a short period of time, we went from bicycle, horse and buggy, to flight. from flight to space travel. And all of this was because someone had the ability to have a vision of what was possible beyond the current state, to say, hey, what if we did this? I wonder what life would look like if we did this. And the minute the Wright brothers did that and successfully did that, that gave Neil the space to actually say, hey, what would it look like if we landed on the moon? Now, you already know the story. Everyone's like, yeah, Jay, we get it. Space travel, like, awesome. I'm gonna be on the first flight that Elon does to space, like 100%. But what you might not know about this story is that when Neil Armstrong lands on the moon, he was allowed to bring with him a rucksack. And when he lands on the moon, he kneels down and he pulls out his rucksack. And as he leans down, he pulls out a piece of the original Wright flag. Because it was a nod and acknowledgement to the Wright brothers' mission that they had evolved their vision, they worked in wonder, they had connected to their community to make happen. All of that wouldn't have just been them alone. And I can't help but think, as we head into these next few days, right? This is our opportunity to say, hey, what is possible as we start to lean into each other? I'm so excited to be here, and like I'm just so glad and grateful. And as we head into this, the one question I'll leave you with is this: how do we connect to one another over the next 2 days? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. That was inspiring and moving. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us and encouraging us to look forward and find the wonder. Thank you.